Okay, so you want to own a cruise ship. Buy a big boat, sell tickets, sail to the Caribbean, feed your passengers, bring them home, and do it again next week. Sounds like a floating hotel that prints money, right? The reality is a little different. Take a ship like Icon of the Seas. It brings in roughly $2.7 million a day, but that ship cost $2 billion to build. Fuel alone runs you $80,000 to $220,000 a day. Every time you pull into port, you hand over $50,000 to $200,000. You have 2,350 crew members who need paying, housing, and feeding, and a $2 billion loan that is quietly accruing interest every second. The ticket itself barely makes you any money. The real profit comes from a spending environment you would never accept on land. Let me show you how a cruise ship actually makes its money. What you are buying is not a ship. You are buying a floating spending trap where nobody can leave. You are going up against an oligopoly. The big three cruise lines control the oceans. Carnival Corporation has around 90 ships, Royal Caribbean Group has 70, and Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings has 35. Together, they control roughly 72% of the global passenger capacity. A single megaship is a mobile city, packing 5,000 to 7,600 passengers and over 2,000 crew into a steel hull. And you do not register it in the United States. You register under something called a flag of convenience in places like the Bahamas or Panama, which means no U.S. corporate tax, no U.S. labor laws, and crew wages set at developing world rates. This is not tourism. This is asset-heavy consumer retail, except the mall happens to float. Passengers see a vacation. You see a cash burn approaching $1 million a day that starts the moment the engines turn on. To even get in the game, you have to write a massive check, and you have 3 tiers to choose from. The entry level is buying a used ship, which will cost you $20 million to $100 million. Back in 2022, when Crystal Cruises went bankrupt, A&K Travel Group bought their ships at auction. They picked up the Symphony for $25 million and the Serenity for $103 million. But that is just the sticker price. Used ships come with a hidden trap called Drydock refurbishment, where you have to pull the ship out of the water to update and repair it. That alone can cost tens of millions. The middle tier is ordering a new build for 3,000 to 4,000 passengers. That costs between $800 million and $1.2 billion. Look at the Carnival Jubilee delivered in 2023. It cost around $950 million and runs on LNG, or liquefied natural gas, which is cleaner but more expensive to implement. The top tier is the modern megaship. Icon of the Seas cost $2 billion and holds 7,600 passengers. The metric you care about here is cost per berth, basically how much capital you spend per passenger bed. For mass-market ships, it runs $150,000 to $300,000 per berth. But if you are building an ultra-luxury ship like the Ritz-Carlton Evrima, your cost jumps to well north of $1 million per berth. And you cannot just hire any shipyard to build these. Only 3 shipyards in the world can build one: Fincantieri, Meyer Werft, and Chantier de l'Atlantique. They are booked through 2030, and lead time runs 3.5 to 5 years. While you wait, you figure out your hidden structural costs. Maritime law dictates you must put your ship in dry dock every 3 to 5 years. That is a mandatory $10 million to $30 million expense each time. Then there is insurance. Protection and indemnity covers passenger injuries and dock damage. Hull coverage insures the ship itself. Put them together, a few million a year. And if you want those cleaner LNG dual-fuel engines to meet modern regulations, that is a $100 million premium per ship right out of the gate. Once the ship touches the water, your daily burn rate is around $920,000 a day. Picture this. It is 6 a.m. Your ship is docked in Cozumel. Before a single passenger has woken up, your kitchen crew has already started prepping breakfast for 5,000 people. Your engineering team is running the desalination and water treatment systems that keep 2,500 cabins supplied with fresh water. The air conditioning is cooling roughly 500,000 square feet of enclosed space in Caribbean heat. The navigation bridge is staffed. The fuel is still burning, because you cannot shut down the main engines in port without losing electrical power to everything on board. You have not sold a single drink, not taken a single casino bet, and you are already several $100,000 into your day. The biggest variable cost is fuel. A megaship burns 150 to 250 tons of fuel every single day, costing you $80,000 to $220,000 every 24 hours. You have fuel choices, but none of them are cheap. The cheapest heavy fuel oil runs around $500 per ton, but requires a multi-million-dollar exhaust scrubber to meet sulfur regulations. Cleaner alternatives cost $600 to $700 per ton. Then you have to feed everybody. You spend about $13 per person per day on raw food. Multiply that by 5,000 passengers, and you are looking at around $65,000 a day just in groceries. That does not include crew meals. Next, you have to pay the ports. Every time you dock, you pay berthing fees, harbor pilots, tugboats, and a local head tax of roughly $30 to $40 per passenger. A single port call can run you well over $100,000, and you hit 3 or 4 ports a week. Then there is your crew payroll, which runs $2.5 million to $4.5 million a month for a megaship. This brings us back to the flag of convenience. You register in the Bahamas not because you like the Caribbean vibe, but because the Bahamas has no minimum wage law and doesn't require U.S. maritime labor compliance. Your entry-level service staff get a base pay of $900 to $1,500 a month. With tips, they take home around $2,000 a month. They work 70 to 84 hours a week on 4 to 9 month contracts with 0 days off. Your crew comes primarily from the Philippines, India, and Indonesia. Mass-market ships run about 1 crew member for every 2.4 passengers. Luxury pushes that to 1 to 1. You have 2,350 crew members on board, and you are entirely responsible for their housing, food, medical care, and flying them home when their contract ends. That is what this side of the business looks like. 2,300 people earning a fraction of what they would make on land, working a schedule nobody in the U.S. would accept, on a ship registered in a country most of them have never been to. The most dangerous hidden cost is the dry dock. SOLAS, an international maritime safety treaty, mandates your ship come out of the water every 3 to 5 years. That costs tens of millions. But the real pain is the 30 to 45 days it sits idle. 0 revenue. Crew still on payroll. Your $2 billion asset earning nothing. You are constantly bleeding cash to what are essentially ecosystem parasites. Ports take 6 figures every time you dock, and you have no choice but to pay. The shipyard oligopoly is booked to 2030, and if you want to cut the line, you pay a massive premium. Fuel suppliers set the price, not you. Insurers collect whether you sail or not. Everyone else in this chain gets paid no matter what happens. You only get paid if everything works. Now, all of those costs hit you, whether the ship is full or half empty. So the question is, who is actually on board and how much are they spending? Not every passenger is worth the same amount to you. The economics break down by cabin type. Inside cabins at $150 a night, with maybe $30 to $50 in daily onboard spending, give you razor-thin margins. Balcony cabins at around $250 a night are your bread and butter. Suite guests at $500 plus a night buy every premium package and represent roughly 5% of guests, driving an outsized share of profit. Your entire business hinges on one key metric: onboard revenue per passenger cruise day. That is simply how much each guest spends on board beyond the ticket per day on things like drinks, the casino, and excursions. For a company like Norwegian, this number currently exceeds $126 per person per day. That specific number is what determines whether your floating city actually makes a profit. Here is where we get to the core secret of the industry. The ticket you sell is a Trojan horse. It is a loss leader. The ticket accounts for 60 to 65% of your total revenue, but that money basically just goes to cover your ship debt, fuel, port fees and crew. The real money is onboard spending. It only makes up 35 to 40% of your total revenue, but it accounts for 50 to 70% of your net profit. The king of this profit engine is alcohol. You sell an unlimited drink package for $65 to $110 per person per day. The cost of goods sold on alcohol is incredibly low, only 12 to 15%, giving you a massive 85% gross margin. And you force a bundle. If one adult in a cabin buys the unlimited drink package, every other adult in that cabin is required to buy it too. On a 5,000-person ship, your beverage revenue alone can easily clear $200,000 a day. And when fuel prices spike and you start cutting costs, this is the last line you touch. The margins here are what actually keep the ship solvent. Then you have the casino. Because you operate under international maritime law, the casino opens the moment you are 12 nautical miles offshore. A megaship casino generates $15 million to $35 million in annual revenue, and you control the odds. Slot payouts run 88 to 92% on ships versus 93 to 96 in Vegas. Higher house edge at sea. You run this at an 85 to 90% gross margin with almost zero variable costs. Next is internet access. You pay a fixed monthly cost for bandwidth, often using Starlink, and you spread that cost across 5,000 paying guests. You charge them $15 to $25 per person per day, operating at an 85% plus gross margin. But the ultimate vertical integration is the private island. Think of Royal Caribbean's Coco Cay in the Bahamas. They spent $250 million transforming it from a bare strip of sand into a full-scale resort with a water park, zip lines, private cabanas, and a freshwater pool. When a ship docks there, every restaurant, every bar, every jet ski rental on the island is owned by Royal Caribbean. The guests step off the ship and onto what feels like a tropical paradise, except every single transaction flows back to the same company that sold them the ticket. There is nowhere else to go. The island has no town, no competing restaurants, no local market where someone might undercut your prices. The ship is your only ride home. The island is the only shore, and both belong to the same owner. Disney does the same thing with Castaway Cay. At a regular port like Nassau, passengers walk off and spend at local restaurants. That revenue is gone. At your own island, you get all of it back. The industry calls this a captive spending environment. Zero alternatives, zero leakage. But that $250 million island sits on a Caribbean hurricane track. One Category 5 storm can put your most profitable asset underwater for a full season. But holding a captive audience at sea carries massive risks, because the same isolation that traps your customers also traps you. Take a global event like COVID. In March 2020, the entire cruise industry went to zero overnight. Not a slow decline, zero. Every single ship pulled out of service. In April 2020, dozens of ships sat anchored off Manila, the Bahamas, and southern England. No passengers, skeleton crews. A ship in warm layup, small crew keeping the systems alive, costs $2 to $3 million a month. Mothball it completely, and you are still burning $1 million. Carnival had about 90 of these ships sitting idle at the same time. Do that math. They were burning $650 million a month in cash with zero revenue coming in. Picture a captain of a 4,000-berth ship anchored off the Bahamas, looking out at 3 other ships from competing lines sitting just as idle a quarter-mile away. His crew is still eating 3 meals a day. His owners are wondering how many more months they can keep this up. Between 2020 and 2021, the Big Three combined lost well over $35 billion. Carnival's long-term debt went from $11.5 billion to a peak of over $33 billion. They had to permanently retire or sell 18 ships, wiping out 12% of their total capacity, just to stop the bleeding. And if you do not have that kind of scale to absorb losses like that, you simply die. Crystal Cruises' parent company, Genting Hong Kong, completely collapsed, defaulting on $2.78 billion in debt. Their ships got seized by creditors in the Bahamas over unpaid fuel bills. Crew members were stranded on board for weeks, unpaid, waiting for repatriation flights that kept getting canceled. Then you have physical catastrophe. On January 13, 2012, the Costa Concordia ran aground off the coast of Italy. The total economic loss was roughly $2 billion. That included a $570 million loss on the ship itself and a $1.2 billion salvage operation, making it the most expensive maritime salvage in history. The captain, Francesco Schettino, was sentenced to 16 years in prison. You also face severe regulatory risks and environmental fines. In 2016, Princess Cruises got caught running what investigators called a magic pipe. Crew members had rigged a bypass in the engine room to dump oily waste directly into the ocean, instead of routing it through the required treatment system, and the official logs were doctored to hide it. The investigation started when an engineer walked into a UK Port Authority office and reported what his own crew had been doing. That resulted in a $40 million criminal fine. In 2019, they violated probation by dumping plastic in Bahamian waters and trying to bypass a court-appointed monitor. That added another $20 million. Total criminal environmental fines for one company, over $60 million. Today, in 2026, you are facing a massive paradigm shift. The International Maritime Organization has strict decarbonization mandates. They demand a 20 to 30% carbon reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. The European Union's ETS carbon allowance program is now at 100% coverage. Every single ton of carbon you emit in their waters requires a paid permit. At the same time, cities are kicking you out. Venice banned ships over 25,000 gross tons back in 2021. Barcelona is closing its downtown cruise terminals and imposing steep daily tourist surcharges. Amsterdam cut its annual cruise calls from 190 to 100 and is planning a full ban by 2035. Your $2 billion ship may find that more and more high-yield ports simply will not let you dock. Let's look at a good year versus a bad year for the exact same asset, a 4,000-berth Caribbean megaship. In a good year, you run at 105% occupancy because of kids in third and fourth beds. You operate for 48 weeks and spend 4 weeks in dry dock. Your daily revenue is $1.1 million, split between $700,000 in ticket sales and $400,000 in onboard spending. That gives you an annual revenue of roughly $370 million. Your biggest cost lines: $60 million in fuel, $45 million in crew, $28 million in port fees, and $60 million in depreciation. Add food, insurance, marketing, and admin, and total costs hit roughly $266 million. This leaves you with an EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, of roughly $104 million. That is a 28% margin, matching Carnival's benchmark. After pulling out your $60 million depreciation, your operating profit is about $44 million. But you have a $1.4 billion loan at 5.5% interest. That is $77 million in interest payments. Your pre-tax net income is actually negative $33 million. Think about what that means. You just spent $2 billion on a ship, ran a nearly flawless operation for an entire year, achieved above-average occupancy, kept your costs disciplined, and you still lost money. That is not a failure of management. That is just how the math works when you only have one ship. The business only works at fleet scale. Carnival does not run one ship. They run 90. Across that fleet, they generate $7.2 billion in EBITDA and $2.8 billion in net income. The individual ship loses money. The network makes it work. Now look at a bad year. Same ship, same market. Early in the year, a norovirus outbreak sweeps through the ship. The CDC orders a 2-week shutdown. It hits the headlines. Between issuing refunds and running the ship deadhead with no paying passengers, you take a direct loss of $8 million. Because of the bad press, your annual occupancy drops to 88%. Your total revenue falls to $310 million. Meanwhile, tensions in the Middle East push oil prices up 20%. Your fuel bill jumps from $60 million to $72 million. The EU ETS carbon allowance in 2026 adds another $5 million to your costs. Passenger satisfaction slips and onboard spend per cruise day drops by $15. Your total operating costs rise to $280 million. Your EBITDA collapses to roughly $30 million. After taking out $60 million for depreciation and $77 million for debt interest, your pre-tax net loss is $107 million. The difference between the good year and the bad year is not a change in strategy. It is 2 weeks of norovirus, a few rounds of oil prices, and one EU carbon bill. Your $2 billion asset is working for the bank, not for you. Cash flow lasts 18 months before you need new investors or have to sell at a loss. The companies that actually make it in this business share 3 traits. First, they have a scale monopoly. Only Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian can survive long-term. When you operate 90 ships, every cost line shrinks. You get bulk fuel contracts, permanent port agreements, and marketing costs spread across 13 million guests a year. The independents could never compete. Crystal tried. Pullmantur tried. Both are gone. Second, they own their destinations. They bought private Caribbean islands and spent hundreds of millions turning them into captive resorts. This is not just a revenue play. It is a hedge against port restrictions. When cities start taxing or banning cruise ships, your private island is immune. It just sits there, generating pure margin every time you dock. Third, they exercise extreme debt management discipline. Carnival spent 3 years after COVID doing nothing except paying down debt from a peak of $33 billion before they could restore dividends. Your ship is still burning close to $1 million a day. If your cash flow misses for even 1 month, the bank is already on the phone. A cruise ship is not really a travel business. It is a highly leveraged, floating shopping mall with a captive audience that physically cannot leave. The ticket price gets them on board. The ocean is what keeps them there. But the real product was never the steel ship, and it was never the tropical destination. It was always the ocean itself. Thousands of miles of open water where no competitor can build a business next door. No tax authority can easily reach you, and every dollar spent has nowhere else to go.